Bienvenidas, comadres, compadres, and friends, to our November 2020 teleconference. This is Julia Abrantes, Submissions Coordinator for the Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club. We wish you and your familias health, safety, and love. We encourage you to put laughter into your life. Prayer and laughter help us relieve stress, and I suspect we all need all the help we can get. We'd like to take a moment to say that we are always thankful for your support of our authors and this teleconference, and we hope that you spend the holidays safely with those you love. Podcasts are now being uploaded to our website. Feel free to download to listen to any of your favorite interviews. Mil gracias to Comadre Dora Abreu for doing this labor of love for us. Our November 2020 teleconference features Book of the Month author Rudy Ruiz and additional conversations with author Cecelia Aragon. First, a bit of history about our book club. Our first book club gathering was in July 2004 in New York at Comadre Maria Ferrer's apartment. After a hiatus, it was restarted in March 2007. Comadre Johanna Castillo, at that time national organizer of the book club and former Comadres board member, said, "We are launching the book club to promote the work of Latino authors to every book lover, to bring our community to bookstores, and to support our writers. Now, more than ever, we need to support our Latino authors. We encourage you to join our local book club in your city. We have clubs in 12 cities, and most are meeting virtually now. There's sure to be one that can fit into your schedule. If your city doesn't have one, why not help us start one? For more information about our book club, please visit our website at latinolit.com. We started these teleconferences, Reading with Las Comadres, in October of 2006. We are in our 14th year. We created the Reading with Las Comadres teleconferences and book club in an effort to entice everyone to read more Latino authors, to learn about Latino roots and different perspectives on Latino cultures and heritage. Our book club and teleconferences are open to all, not just Latinos. We are creating a space for everyone to explore the Latino writer's mind and soul as portrayed through the written word, so please invite others to join us. We are grateful to the publishers, Blackstone Publishing, for their support of this teleconference with free books. For more information about the authors and publishers, visit our website at latinolit.com. Our Book of the Month author will be interviewed by Comadre Nora Comstock. Let's learn a little bit about Rudy. Award-winning author Rudy Ruiz was selected as #1 among the top 10 new Latino authors to watch and read in 2015. Ruiz was born in Texas, the son and grandson of Mexican immigrants. He grew up in a bilingual, bicultural setting along both sides of the border. He earned his bachelor and master's degree at Harvard, where his studies included literature and creative writing. Ruiz's fiction debut, Seven for the Revolution, won 4 International Latino Book Awards. In 2017, he was awarded the Gulf Coast Prize in Fiction. His stories have appeared in literary journals including Gulf Coast, The Ninth Letter, Border Census, New Texas, and the Notre Dame Review. He currently resides in San Antonio with his wife and children. Our interviewer is none other than Las Comadres founder and board member, Dr. Nora de Hoyos Comstock. Comadre Nora, take it away.
Hi, Julia. Thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm really excited about interviewing Rudy, who is really one of my favorite people in the whole world. I'm so glad he's a writer. So, Rudy, tell us, when did you start writing?
Well, thank you, Nora, and by the way, thank you for that wonderful introduction. It's very, very much a heartfelt, mutual feeling, and I've appreciated all of your support and all of Las Comadres' support over the years. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all Las Comadres who are listening. I started writing really as a young kid, really in elementary school. I loved reading from an early age, thanks to my mom who put books in my hands and read to me, from a very early age. And I started writing like kind of my first little stories in elementary school and kept writing all through high school and really really got into it in college and started to feel like this is something I really wanted to do, the rest of my life. So it's been a lifelong journey for me.
Great. I didn't realize that, Rudy. I don't think we'd ever talked about that. But I know that your stories do, and I know you've written a lot of short stories, and I love reading your short stories. And I know some of them talk about those early years in the Catholic school and, the sorts of things that you did there. So they really, all of them would make great novels, each one of them. So was Fulgencio once a short story?
No, I appreciate that observation. And I have been working on a novel that is a novel in stories, made up of all those short stories you mentioned that I've written over the years about. They're sort of semi-autobiographical about a character growing up on the border in Brownsville, which is where I was born and raised, in Brownsville, Texas. And I've sort of slowly written that series of short stories over the years with this sort of mindset of not rushing myself to complete that story, and with the goal of it eventually being published as a novel. But Fulgencio was actually kind of the opposite. It was, throughout all the years that I was writing short fiction, I knew that I eventually wanted to write a novel, but I kept waiting for the right moment, when I felt like I had sort of had the life experience that I felt I needed to write that first novel. And Fulgencio was that sort of inspiration that quite a few years ago, the day that I decided I felt like I was ready and I knew what story I wanted to tell in a novel format, it was the resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez that crystallized in my mind, and I wrote it, and I've written a lot since, but it is my first novel to be published, so it's very exciting for me.
It is. How long did it take you to write this novel, Rudy?
Well, it's a interesting journey. The first draft of the novel really was, like I said, it was a total inspiration where it came to me, and it was written like in 3 months. And unfortunately, that was 22 years ago. so it was just this very long journey. It was like bam. It was like lightning struck, and the novel came to me, and I wrote it. And I almost had a book deal for it like 20 years ago. But for whatever reason, the timing wasn't right. It wasn't the right draft of the novel, and the novel kept sort of ending up back on the shelf. And I revisited it over the years many times. In 2015, my father, who was one of probably the biggest inspiration for the character of Fulgencio, he passed away, and part of my sort of self-therapy was to dust off the novel and go back to it and revisit it and do a major rewrite, and subsequently it got picked up and it got published by Blackstone Publishing. And it's interesting because the whole journey of writing the novel for me oftentimes was a process of sort of trying to understand this character based on my father, which in part was sort of trying to understand my father. And I guess maybe it was meant to be that it wasn't until my father's journey on this earth was concluded would I reach a point of rewriting the novel that it would be ready, to be in print. So an interesting experience for sure, but a very satisfying one as well.
Oh, Rudy, how did it change? Did it stay pretty much in the same form, or did you make major changes based on, the years since you started it and then picked it up again?
There were definitely major changes along the way. I think it just became a better story, a clearer narrative, and I think that the characters, both Fulgencio and his the love of his life, Carolina Mendelssohn is the character's name in the book. I think both of those characters just grew through the rewrites, became more nuanced, became more complex, and I think more reflective of the real human experience. So I think with every time that I would revisit the novel, I think it became a richer story. And I think it was always a magical realism novel, but I feel that the dimensions of magical realism also became more intertwined into the fabric of the story and the plot the more I wrote it, as opposed to just being a literary device. So I think overall it just became kind of a more complete, immersive sort of world, which I call La Frontera in the book. It's like a mythical border town that it takes place in.
So tell me a little bit more about magical realism. How do you interpret that? Because, I think I've heard a lot of different ways to approach it. What is your take on it?
Well, for me, it felt like a wonderful way to reconnect with, Latino culture and our roots and heritage, and sort of what I consider sort of an intrinsic spirituality, and sort of a different way, a less linear way of looking at life and time and borders, whether it's the geographic border of the U.S. and Mexico, which the story is set on, or the sort of more metaphysical border between life and death, or the border between past and present and future. I felt magical realism was like a genre or a style in which you could really explore sort of the permeability, the porous nature of those borders, and in a way blur those borders, which when you grow up, when you're born and raised on a border or have lived on a border like I have, you realize that the border is a construct, and it's a human construct, and it is very porous, and it is very arbitrary, and it can be blurred. And so I felt magical realism for telling these stories on the border, for me, felt very natural. And when I first sort of fell in love with magical realism was in literature classes in college, reading Gabriel Garcia Marquez and various other Latin American and authors. I just fell in love with it. I'd always loved reading, but suddenly it was like I was reading. I grew up being educated in the U.S., reading English language books, and there weren't a lot of Latino stories or stories set in our culture being used in curricula at the time. And so for me, when I first read those books set in Latin America and within magical realism, I just thought, wow, this is like a whole other level. I became further enraptured by reading and writing. And I thought, well, I want to tell this kind of story from the perspective of Latino in the United States. And so really Fulgencio brought that dream to life, because most of my short fiction has been not in the magical realism style.
Mm-hmm. So, and then another kind of key question is, how did you decide to make it comedic instead of a more serious approach?
Well,
and while you talk about that, would you also talk about how you brought music into it?
Oh yeah, thank you. Well, a lot of how really a great I think any great story that tries to reflect some realities of life will have drama, and it'll have love, and it'll have pain and sorrow, and of course you can't as a human being, we can't carry those things without humor. I mean, we need it to survive. And in a story like Fulgencio's, where he spends a couple decades basically mourning the loss of this love affair, he really needed humor to sort of get by, and he also needed his music, his singing, to sort of express himself and to survive. And it was very natural for me to bring those to life in this story, because, as I mentioned, my own father was a big inspiration for the character of Fulgencio, and stories from my father's life as a son of immigrants growing up on the border in the 1950s, was a big source of inspiration for the novel. it was really easy for me to weave these elements into the novel because they were really palpable in his own life. He was surrounded by these fascinating, great characters and friends and mentors and siblings and his mom and various people like that, and they were all pretty funny. They had their great senses of humor, and they kept him alive while in real life. And for Fulgencio, those characters, based on those types of the circle of friends and family, really helped keep him alive, or on life support, if you will, until he's resurrected, so to speak, and he has a second chance at love. And then with the singing, my father was this wonderful singer, and he sang all the old boleros from Mexico, from the golden age of Mexican music and film in the 50s. And these are songs like Sin Ti and like Cuatro Vidas and, La Barca de Oro and Veracruz, songs like that. So Fulgencio sings those songs, and they really chronicle the journey of his relationship with Carolina, from falling in love to the heartbreak to the romance of rekindling the love. And so throughout the novel, he sings those songs, and I've included the lyrics in the book, both in English and in Spanish. And in addition, I've created a Spotify playlist. So if anybody who listens to this recording, wants to check out the songs and listen to them while they read the book, you just search for The Resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez on Spotify, and I think it's a really neat companion.
Wonderful. Oh, thank you so much for doing that, Rudy. So Fulgencio is a really unusual name. I don't think I'd ever heard it before. Where did it come from?
Well, that's really strange, and it's a great question. When I started writing the novel, the name really just came to me from the start, and I really don't know where it came from because it's not a name I had ever heard. It's not a family name. My father's name was Rodolfo, just like mine, and which is where Rudy comes from. And I knew right away I wanted it to be sort of a very Spanish sounding, kind of a mouthful of a name, just like Rodolfo is. But I didn't want it to be Rodolfo. I had enough Rodolfo growing up with it. So Fulgencio just kind of came to me. It's one of those, polysyllabic, complicated sounding, very, very Spanish sounding name. You're not going to hear a U.S. American version of Fulgencio. Interestingly, later when I went back and the first time I was asked that question, I went back and I did some research on the root of the name, and it comes from the Latin word fulgens, Fulgens, fulgens or fulgens, which means brilliant or shining. And I thought that was a really cool coincidence because I think Fulgencio has this very optimistic, brilliant, shining spirit, where it drives them throughout the story. It's this passion and this desire for these things that he dreams of having in his life, and this sort of drive that he has to never give up, and being super optimistic and trying to overcome all his obstacles. So I felt like in the end, the root meaning of Fulgencio ended up matching the character, but it wasn't even intentional.
Wow. Okay. Tell us, I want to hear a little bit more from character development from you. You've kind of alluded to it a couple of times, but these characters are bigger than life. Really, all of them have a real presence on the page, and I can see them. I mean, that's just, and so how did you create these characters? I know some of them, and maybe all of them, come from your father's and your growing up experiences. Tell us a little more about how you brought them to life here, and please include La Virgencita.
Thank you. That's a great compliment. I feel like, I'm sure, we all have people in our lives that, as we're growing up, to us seem larger than life. For me, for example, my father was that kind of inspiration. He was not a famous person, he was not a wealthy person, but he was larger than life. Anybody who knew him, who grew up around him or spent time around him, felt this sort of magnetism, this charisma, you know, he was the kind of person that did, like Fulgencio, rise up from total abject poverty, you know, to be the first person in his family to go to college, to own his own business, to, you know, do things like Fulgencio does, which is help others, and, you know, celebrate his culture, even in the face of a time when often Latinos were told, like, not to speak, you know, Spanish, to just speak English and so forth. My dad was the kind of guy who would happily break into a Spanish song, you know, at the drop of a hat. So it was. I feel like the characters that loom large in the novel of Fulgencio are very much rooted in real people that I fictionalized, but they were real people that had that sort of just outsized personality. You know, Fulgencio is one of them. His mother, you know, is Ninfa is also one of them. La Virgencita and her companion in the novel, which is Fulgencio's grandfather, Fernando Cisneros, I think are kind of, even though they're smaller side characters, they're larger than life because La Virgencita, of course, is rooted in La Virgen de Guadalupe, and in the story, she's this very magical apparition in Fulgencio's grandfather's house out on the ranch in Mexico, and then Fulgencio's grandfather, while a small character, is also very unique and memorable, and it's mainly his ghost that comes out in the book. But to me, those elements were also very derived from the feeling in real life growing up on the border and listening to the stories of my father and my grandmother, both my grandmothers, that really made me feel like the people they talked about, who even if they had passed away many years ago and I never met them, I felt like they really brought them to life in a way that told me in my heart, like, that those spirits, those dearly beloved departed spirits, were still with them in their minds and in their hearts. And I felt like that was a very cultural, you know, I guess phenomenon, if you will. I really continue to feel it to this day, decades later, as many of my loved ones from my upbringing are gone from this earth. I still feel very much their presence in their memories and in their stories and in their teachings and their dichos. All those types of elements stay with me, and so I feel like those are the kinds of characters that really populate La Frontera in Fulgencio's world.
That's great, Rudy. Thank you so much for doing that. You make me think of Day of the Dead and the way we keep memory alive through the altares and the celebration of the dead. Thank you for doing that. And one final question that I have for you, because I think we're going to run out of time. I'm so excited. I have so many questions. I have to fit this one in. In one of our comadres from San Antonio, and the question about magical realism came from our Denver comadres. I reframed it a little bit, but New York City comadre asked about the ending. That it was a kind of she didn't anticipate that. That one was a total surprise, and wanted to know if you had several endings to pick from. Did you have several resolutions to the story, and you picked this one? Can you talk about that?
Well, you know, I appreciate the question. I'm so happy to hear that we have comadres joining in from all over the country.
Yes.
And you know, I think it's a great question. In the first time from my very first draft, this was the ending of the novel. The way it ended is the way I originally wrote it. Part of it to me was that I feel like for Fulgencio, and in a way it symbolizes or captures for me the whole immigrant experience of each generation building on the accomplishments and the labors of the previous generation, which you really see happen with you know, Fulgencio being able to take a step beyond where his parents were at, having come to the United States from Mexico, and you felt a lot the struggle between that first generation and the more acculturated children you felt that in the resentment that existed from Fulgencio's father towards Fulgencio, as Fulgencio started to move out of this blue collar, hard labor existence to what eventually would be a more, college graduate, white collar type of experience. And that was a tough challenge. And then, the next generation after Fulgencio, you don't feel that as much, and you instead start to get more of a positive, constructive feeling as his and Carolina's daughter, can build on their accomplishments. And to me, it was important because it kind of symbolized the progress that we can make generation after generation, and that we can go back to our roots and learn from the past and correct mistakes or learn from the mistakes of our ancestors and try to always keep making our community and our home and our community of nations in this case better, and more sustainable for more people of diverse backgrounds. And that's sort of what happens there at the end of the novel. So yeah, that was always the way I planned to write it. I did at one point think of an alternative ending, of ending it sooner and not doing that whole ending, just sort of ending it a little bit earlier in the book. But I felt like that ending was just symbolic of the future, and I wanted to include it.
That's great, Rudy. Thank you. One final question. I know you're working on a second book. Can you give us a sneak peek?
Oh, I'd love to. Yes, I'm working on the next novel. It's called Valley of Shadows. It's also being published by Blackstone, and it actually it's kind of a little bit of a prequel to the resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez, in that it goes back into the late 1800s, the 1880s, in West Texas. And the protagonist is an ancestor of Fulgencio's who has tried to escape the family curse, which is one of the magical realism elements of the novel. He's tried to escape the curse by running away from La Frontera, and he's ended up in West Texas. And he is basically a displaced Mexican lawman whose town on the border ends up on the American side of the river when the Rio Grande changes course. And so he ends up having to deal with all sorts of injustices and challenges of the type that we read of in history, the kinds of things that were going on in West Texas with the Texas Rangers and Mexican American residents and Apache residents of that region as well. So it's also a magical realism story, and I've already finished the first draft, so I'm very excited about it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rudy. It has been a pleasure to talk with you about this wonderful book. I think about it often. I love the characters. They're just so big.
Well, thank you so much, Nora. I appreciate so much your support, you reading the book, you supporting the book, and just your encouragement throughout the years. I mean, without your friendship and encouragement of friends and family like you, I don't think I wouldn't have gotten it out there. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Nora and compadre Rudy. And now a little bit about our conversations with author. Cecelia Aragon is an author, airshow pilot, and the first Latina full professor in the College of Engineering at the University of Washington in Seattle. She co-authored Writers in the Secret Garden, has worked with Nobel Prize winners, taught astronauts to fly, and created musical simulations of the universe with rock stars. Oh, my. Her major awards for research and a stint at NASA designing software for Mars missions led President Obama to call her one of the top scientists and engineers in the country. For more information, visit her website, CeceliaAragonAuthor.com. Our interviewer is Comadre Maria Ferrer. Maria Ferrer is the project manager for Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club. An avid reader, Maria has been a comadre and book club member for over 15 years. She enjoys discovering new Latino authors and going on endless adventures through their books. And better yet, she relishes the lively and passionate book club discussions. Maria lives in New York City and is working on a book of her own. Comadre Maria, take it away.
Thank you, Julia. Welcome, Cecelia. We're so happy that you could join us tonight.
Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you, Nora and Julia. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah. Well, we have to tell you that we are all popping our buttons like your dad over this novel. It's very inspiring, and it was scary and inspiring, and all that in a few chapters. So let's get to it. Now, I read on your blog that you were inspired to write your story after you learned that your mom was writing her story.
Yes.
Right?
Go
so
on.
Did you read hers? Did she read yours?
Yeah, so sadly my mother passed away in 2002, but before she did,
We're sorry about that.
So both my parents are immigrants, and my mother was Filipina, and she wrote a memoir called Birthdays in the Cemetery about her childhood growing up in the Philippines during World War II. And I just loved this story. It was so rich with sensory detail, and it really gave me an insight into who my mother was. And it occurred to me, I can write a memoir too.
Like mother, like daughter.
Yes.
So take us back to that fateful day when your office friend Carlos invites you to fly with him.
All right. So first of all, I have to let you know that I was just probably the most timid, fearful child you had ever known. Everybody who knew me thought I was never going to accomplish anything in life because I was scared of everything. I was scared of elevators. I was scared of shaking hands with people. And, both my parents were immigrants. My dad was Chilean, and my mom, as I said, from the Philippines. And I'd been living my entire life kind of afraid of doing anything. I'd been discouraged by teachers and bullied by classmates who called me racial epithets when I was a child. And by the time I was 25, I was kind of functioning, but really just barely, living this very narrow life. And whenever anybody suggested anything that was daring or adventurous, I would say, oh no, I can't do that. I'm not that sort of person. And then one day, a friend of mine, he wasn't even quite a friend yet. He was a colleague at my new job. And he said, how would you like to go for a ride in a small airplane? And I said to myself, what? No way. I don't want to die. But then it occurred to me in a moment, I've been doing this a lot. And if I keep on doing this, my life is never going to change. I'm always going to be in the background, on the sidelines. I'll never have a chance to really be the sort of person I want to be. So I said, yes. And I couldn't quite believe what I had said. But the next Saturday, I met him at the airport, and he'd come flying in this 4-seat airplane, this little tiny airplane. And I walked out to it, and I thought, oh my gosh, this plane looks like a toy. Can I figure out some way to back out? But I couldn't. I was there. I was too embarrassed to back out. So got into the airplane, and I was just sitting there kind of shaking and clutching the seat and saying, well, all I have to do is sit here, and I'll get through it, and then it'll all be over, and I'll never have to see another plane again. And then my friend, he had, I'm sorry?
No, go ahead.
So he has no idea that I'm, going through this. He bounces into the plane with his big grin on his face. He loves flying, and he gets to share something he loves with me. So he doesn't see that I was almost, throwing up from tension. So we take off. And then when the wheels lift off the ground, I look out. We're over the San Francisco Bay. And I realized how gorgeous it was to see the sun glittering on the bay like 1,000,000 gold coins. And then we flew out over the California coast, and the waves splashing against the cliffs looked like lace. And I thought, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I have never dreamt that this could be so wonderful. And then my friend tossed this complicated-looking aviation map right onto my legs and said, hey, find out this coordinate that I need. And I thought, oh, my God. If I don't do this thing, this complicated thing, we're going to crash, because his body language seems to be saying that this is really urgent for me to do this. I mean, of course it wasn't true. But in my panic, I thought there is nothing I can do. I'm freezing and we're going to die. But then it's like I heard my father's voice in my head. My father used to always encourage me to do math. And he always said he was proud of me, and like you said, that his buttons were popping. And I realized, calculating this coordinate is just numbers. It's just math. I can do this. So I figured it out, and I gave my friend this number, and then he grinned, and he turned the airplane, and everything was fine. And my friend gave me this really huge grin, and I realized at that moment that I loved it here and that I wanted to be a pilot too.
No, that's an incredible journey, because if I read the book correctly, from that fateful day that you flew with Carlos, it only took you 6 years. And in 6 years, you had learned how to fly. You were teaching people how to fly. You had entered contests and won and placed, in the first top 5, and you were like, primed for, anything and everything that can happen to you. But it wasn't easy. I mean, you could tell that it was not easy, So tell us about how this 6-year period that really changed you. It affected your marriage, how the time was going and what was happening, or, tell us about those 6 years.
All right. So those 6 years, I think what was really the most important part of that journey, and this is the journey that I talk about in the memoir, and it's kind of an adventure story. The story is set against the backdrop of aviation, and so it's exciting. But I think the real story underneath was not letting the world or people who didn't like me or trust me, not letting a screwed up system screw up my own definition of who I was and how I saw myself. I had to learn to believe in myself, and that was something that I hadn't done as a child, because I grew up in the Midwest, and I was pretty much the only Latina in my school. And my classmates didn't like that I was really good in school, and my teachers accused me of plagiarism when I wrote stories with an advanced vocabulary. And so I wondered all the time, what is going on here? How can I do something so challenging as learn to fly when I was such a timid and fearful person? And what I realized through that difficult journey is that really everybody has something that can help them achieve anything. And for me, I was able to use my ability in math to overcome my fears and become really good at flying. But I don't think it has to be math. It can be anything that you love, that inspires you to keep going and to discover that you are worthwhile. You have all these abilities. And if you just push yourself, if you do a little bit each day, kind of like how I describe in the book, it's amazing how far you can get. And one of the things that makes me really happy is that people who read this story say, well, it's all about flying, and I don't know anything or care anything about flying, but I just loved the book. I loved the adventure story. It really taught me something about myself and about what I can be. And I have to say that when I first took that nervous ride, I had no clue that I would even get a pilot's license. And once I got a pilot's license, I had no clue that I would learn to become a flight instructor or that I would compete in a contest, even a basic introductory contest. But over time, gradually, I just kept pushing myself. Every day, I did something I was scared of. And as I did, my life opened up. And I found I could do more and more wonderful things, and I enjoyed what I was doing more and more. And then one day, I made the United States aerobatic team. I just couldn't believe this. My parents were immigrants. They could barely speak. Well, they couldn't barely speak English. They were actually very good. But they came to the U.S. As adults, and they both had very thick accents, and people would dismiss them. I mean, they refused to sell. My parents made an offer on a house in a neighborhood in my hometown, and the sellers took it off the market. I mean, there were all these things that happened to me growing up, and to actually be representing my country, to represent the United States, and to stand on a podium and hear the national anthem while my parents were there watching was probably the proudest moment of my life. So that's the journey.
But one thing that I got through, from reading your book, I mean, I could see how painfully shy you were and how insecure and we all have that faker syndrome that you were talking about, where
yes.
You think that you are the token Latina and that you are here because they still haven't realized that you don't know anything. And so,
right.
But through the whole book, I saw in you, this stubbornness, this courage, this strength that I think that you had all along, but you were slowly, just like you say, like a tree, slowly unfurling, those cherry blossoms are little buds on the tree, and then, they grow a little leaf, and then they grow a little bud, and then there's a flower one day. And so,
yes.
And I could see that in you. And I'm telling you, like your dad, I was popping buttons. Because that is so encouraging for women, for little girls, and to realize that you went so far and you did it on grit. I mean, let's face it, you were a badass, okay? You say in your book that you were not, but you were, at the end you were. And whenever there was a challenge, you would panic. You would panic for like a day, and then the next day was like, okay, 1 and 1 makes 2, so what's the next step here? And then you moved on, and all of a sudden, you are, I think, was it a bronze medal that you won?
Yes.
Isn't it they say that you won a bronze medal, and
Yes.
that you placed all of a sudden you placed like first and over all the women who had been entering these contests before you?
Yes. Yes, that's correct.
So that's
Thank you.
Yeah, no. You know, we have to give credit where credit is due, and you have shown other girls, you know, that it is possible. Your book shows us that it's clearly possible. Now,
Yes.
we're running out of time, so tell us quickly, how did you get the job at NASA? Because I was waiting for that, and it's not in the book.
Okay. Yes. So I'd always kind of longed to work at NASA, but of course I was shy and I didn't think I was good enough for it. But you know, after I'd learned to fly, I realized, you know, I can apply for these jobs that I don't have much of a chance for, and I just applied, and it turned out that my skills were exactly what they wanted. They liked the fact that I was both a very accomplished software developer at the time and that I was a pilot and that I had this aviation background. And so the combination of the two was a real strength for a place like NASA. And so they actually hired me. It's kind of hard to believe. I still don't really believe it.
No,
but it
that's
was a
great.
wonderful job, and I worked there for 10 years, and I loved every minute.
Did you meet any astronauts that we would know?
Yes, I mean, I met several astronauts. I did fly with Kalpana Chawla. I don't know if you recognize her name, but she was one of the first Indian American astronauts. She actually, sadly, she's most well known for dying in 2003 in the Columbia shuttle accident, which was so sad. She was such a wonderful person. I loved flying with her and just loved her.
Members from our Denver group wanted to know if you ever considered, you know, when you were having these problems with, you know, like finding time to fly and buying a plane and all that, did you ever consider joining the military to be a pilot?
Well, I actually did consider it. At the time, so what I wanted was to be a fighter. I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I wanted to, you know, I wanted to fly F-16s and F-18s and dogfight and do that kind of flying. And at the time, when I was younger, they weren't allowing women into those roles. My father-in-law was a pilot in the Korean War, and so I did talk to him a lot about flying and what to do. And he just encouraged me to keep on doing the kind of flying I was doing. And then I did get a chance to fly both the F-16 and the F-18. As it turned out, I flew in an air show where Top Gun, when it was in San Diego, and a couple of the pilots there saw me flying my air show and experiencing 12 Gs, and they came up to me afterwards and said, you know, we're just starting to see whether women can come into the Navy and fly fighter jets, and we want to see, we're curious whether you as a woman can handle the 9 Gs that fighter pilots experience. Would you like to go for a test ride? And I said, of course. Yeah. Anyway,
you grabbed those keys and went running.
Yeah. And so I did it, and it turns out that one of the advantages that I have is I'm very small. I'm only 5'2", and so the column of blood between my heart and my brain is very short, and that means I have a naturally high G tolerance. Plus, being lightweight, the pilot said, "Oh, you know what? Women are kind of natural fighter pilots. We should be bringing in women, you know, across the service." And I said, "Yes, you should."
Have you ever jumped out of an airplane? like with
Yes.
the parachute and stuff?
Yes. So all aerobatic pilots need to fly with parachutes, just as a safety, just in case something goes wrong, like you have a structural failure in the airplane. It's a legal requirement. And so I thought, I don't want to hesitate for a split second, for half a second, before I make the decision to bail out of an aircraft. I want to feel in my heart that I'm comfortable and with jumping out of a plane and landing safely on the ground. So I took a tandem jump with a company out near Tracy, California, and it was incredibly fun. I loved it, but the only problem I had with it is that you had to keep going down. I wanted to do spins and loops and then go up again, but I still loved it. And the jumpers were really nice to me. They knew I was an aerobatic pilot, so they did some kind of tumbling maneuvers, and I got to see the entire world spread in front of me. I mean, the great thing about jumping out of a plane is the visibility is great. There's no metal in the way, so you can see everything. It's just fantastic. I love it.
Do you still have a plane?
I don't own a plane anymore, but I do occasionally fly. I teach people how to fly aerobatics, and I occasionally fly with my family, to places around Seattle that are interesting to go to. But I have to admit I haven't flown since the start of the pandemic, but I'm hoping to start again in the spring.
That'd be great. And we only have time for one more question. Nowadays, it's very, it's very common to see recruitment for women in STEM, girls in STEM. So do you have any advice for, young women and small girls, high school girls or elementary girls who are looking at STEM for opportunities and maybe a career?
Oh, yeah. Don't let anyone tell you you're not good at math, because sometimes math is difficult, but then if you keep working at it, it gets easier. And one of the reasons why I work so much with young girls in STEM, it's one of my passion projects of encouraging girls to go into science, technology, engineering, and math, because there is no substitute for being a girl or a woman comfortable with math, and you're facing a group of people who think little of you, and you silence the room with your love of numbers. Math is kind of a magic trick. It enables you to instantly get kind of a leg up on all the unconscious biases about you as perhaps as a Latina or as a woman. It's like a magic trick. It's a magic workaround that enables you to creatively find a way around unfairness and injustice. At least it's been that way for me, and it is so worth it. It is so much fun, and I think every girl should study math and should learn to love it. And if you didn't enjoy it in school, it's the teacher's fault, not yours.
I agree. Well, that's the end of our interview. But Cecelia, thank you so much for being with us and for your honesty and for your strength of purpose. You are really an inspiration for all of us. So that is your superpower, to be inspiring, and you inspire all of us.
Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you for those wonderful questions, and thanks to the Comadres. I loved being here.
Julia?
I'm sorry about that. Let me start again. Compadre Rudy, Comadre Cecelia, Nora, and Maria, we are so grateful for the insightful interviews and for spending time with us this evening. We enjoyed the sharing of perspectives and insights from your work and your life. We treasure the opportunity to have learned about you, and we definitely feel more connected to you. We thank Blackstone Publishing for their support of this teleconference and for their generous gift of books for winners of early registration. We thank our audience for taking the time to join us for this teleconference, and thank you for those that submitted questions. And we'd like to thank Comadres Maria Ferrer for the media coordination and the Twitter chat, and to Comadre Dora Abreu for the web work she does for us. Without this volunteer leadership team, this book club and all the associated work would not happen. Mil gracias. Please remember to support your authors by writing a review of their books on sites like Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes & Nobles, etc. These reviews carry weight with the publishers as well as other readers. Buy books to support our authors, and if your library does not have a book you want to read, ask them to order it. And please attend your local book club meetings and bring a friend or two. Remember, it's open to everyone, men and women, and not just Latinos. Our book clubs are all meeting virtually right now, so you'll find the time to fit one into your schedule. Our book of the month for December is Tigers, Not Daughters by Samantha Mabry, published by Algonquin. And our additional conversations with book is Death of a Telenovela Star by Teresa Dovopage, published by Soho Crime. Our teleconference for December will be held on Monday, December 21st. Look for the teleconference registration announcement coming soon. Once again, we wish you a blessed Thanksgiving. Please stay safe. Mil gracias to all y buenas noches.